The evidence of Israel being a country full of rapists who love is now so overwhelming that even the New York Times, which is itself an agent of Israel, an Israeli rag, acknowledges it. In this article, which is substantiated by extensive and detailed testimony from, I believe, 14 individuals, they go into a bunch of detail on what exactly Israel's been doing to the assholes of the people that they imprison for doing nothing wrong, involving, among other things, extensive dog. Of course, the New York Times published this only under their opinion section because they're still cowards and this is still an Israeli rag. But it's a reputable journalist. The claims are reputable. Everything's backed by evidence. Many of these claims have been known for years. The Israelis have been so mad, but surprisingly, they don't fold on this. By they, I assume you mean the New York Times. Hearing from longtime friends, New York Times, there are already discussions, including up the masthead, about retracting the Nick Kristof column. Issues with source credibility and lack of evidence. David Schuster's a Zionist. There's no truth to this at all. Oh, nice. From the New York Times communication. There's no truth to this at all. Nicholas Kristof is a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who's reported on sexual violence for decades, widely regarded as one of the world's best on-the-ground reporters documenting sexual abuse. Nice, okay. Well, they still shouldn't have published it in the opinion section, but, you know. Israel made an IDF soldier who raped a Palestinian prisoner a national celebrity who was on late-night talk shows. Yep. National celebrity, widespread support. They had right-to-rape riots where they rioted in favor of soldiers' right to rape Palestinians. A Likud lawmaker exclaimed that anything, including raping people with wooden sticks, is justifiable if they're terrorists, parentheses, Arabs. And yeah, we know that Israel uses dogs to rape people, trains them. Was that one passage that was removed from, who was it? His diary, where they talked about those IDF soldiers that found a 12-year-old Palestinian and gang raped her and murdered her, and the only one of them who got a sentence was the one who actually murdered her, and they only put him away for 2 years? Ben Gurion, yeah, Ben Gurion was like, yeah, so like a dozen IDF soldiers just this 12-year-old up and down the place and then shot her, and only the one who shot her got a 2-year stint in jail. This one? Yeah, you can read that if you want. It was a good article. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, again, a lot of this stuff has been known for a while, but it does mean a lot that it's finally getting, you know, published in the NYT. Ben Gurion, first PM of Israel, by the way, and is considered left-wing. Yeah, well, you know, the rot goes deep. Fucking hangnail. Is there a reason the media class seems to be moving a bit in Israel? It doesn't. The media class remains as bound by capital as they ever have been. If they move even a little bit on Israel, it's because they know the situation is completely insurmountable. That's it. In the same way that, you know, the moment the Nazi party started to show signs of weakening, every fuckwit, every industrialist in Germany started writing their apology letters to the Allies so they didn't get hanged at Nuremberg. So too will all these media class consultants and pundits and so on beg and scrap for your forgiveness / approval / forgetfulness when eventually support for Israel becomes so politically untenable that they have to just cover it up. Nothing is actually shifting. Training dogs to rape sounds like blood libel. It's crazy that it's true. We must appreciate the work of Zionists who have eliminated blood libel by ensuring that Israelis do everything you could ever accuse them of doing for blood libel, therefore making it no longer libel. Blood libel is now impossible. If you accuse Israel of having done a bad thing, you are correct. Yes, they're just called blood truths. What's blood libel? Blood libel is a term to refer to the accusations that Nazis or other anti-Semites made against Jews back in the, I mean, not just the 30s, but it was around that time period. That's when the period of time the term typically refers to refer to like the insane shit they thought Jews were doing. They thought Jews were like vampire bats or something, you know? Like they would steal children out of cradles or whatever. They were fucking crazy. Anyway, not to be, upstaged, Israel is set about to prove all these claims as close as possible to the truth. But I steadfastly, as an anti-Zionist, do in fact believe that a Zionist and a Jew are not exactly the same thing. These are in fact two distinct categories, and they must be made more distinct. Blood libel goes back to the Middle Ages. You're completely correct. I don't know why I said the 1930s. Blood libel might have been like invoked as a justification for the Nazi crimes, but the concept of blood libel goes back like ages and ages. The UK is treating pro-Palestinian protesters worse than the US. Yeah, they don't have a First Amendment. Breaking, a court will seek to sentence 4 Palestine Action activists found guilty of criminal damage as terrorists, even though they were not convicted of terror charges, in a move kept secret from the jury. That's cool. So the judge or I don't know, whatever they have in the UK, I'm not familiar exactly with their legal process, the same way that I am with America's. So they have been convicted of criminal damage, which I assume what they littered. They littered at the protest. UK media outlets were barred from reporting on this due to court-imposed restrictions, which were lifted today. Cool. Judge Johnson's expected to add a terrorist connection to the charges of Charlotte Head, Samuel Corner, Leona Cameo, and Fatima Rajwani under Section 69 of the Sentencing Act of 2020, despite the jury only convicting them of criminal damage and having no knowledge of that a terror link could later be imposed. This is, by the way, a breakdown in like a very fundamental element of how jury-based trials are supposed to work, which is that the jury decides whether you're guilty of the charges. The judge is supposed to determine the sentencing. The prosecutor determines the charges, the jury decides whether you're guilty or innocent of them, and then the judge determines the sentencing. Whereas in this case, the jury found that they were guilty of criminal damage, and then the judge goes, oops, sorry, you fucking hit my trap card. There were extra secret charges you didn't know about that you actually just convicted them for. Hyper-terrorism, the worst kind of terrorism. Again, worth noting that if the founding fathers could see this, this would be like, they'd be hitting the new. I mean, it's like, it's just a little bit illiberal. How does Israel have so much influence across all of Western civilization? Capital. Israel is an extension of American capital interests, and wealthy people rule the world. They have become increasingly unsubtle in the extent to which they rule the world, but they haven't had much luck, or they wouldn't have much luck, controlling the world if their best argument was we need to defend billionaires. So instead they had to couch themselves behind a marginalized community so they could disingenuously use liberalism as a shield to turn it into an identity wedge issue. Jews, I don't know if you recall this, historically have been a very prosecuted group, so they basically work as the most effective shields. If no Jews existed, if there was not a single Jew in all of history, if they just weren't a group that existed, if there were only 2 Abrahamic religions, well, I guess there's 4 in total, you know what I mean. If Judaism never existed, they probably would have chosen black people. There would be like a Liberia equivalent, a black ethno-state behind which capital would hide. What about Mormons? Mormons are not as historically prosecuted as black people. But it could have been anyone, is my point. That it is like, there's Israel only existed after the Second World War. Capital has long invested its interest in this project, using it as a shield. It could have been any ethno-nationalist group. It could have been anyone. It could have been Liberia. It could have been, it needed to be a historically prosecuted group so that liberals could disingenuously use them as a shield. It couldn't be just flat out white supremacists. It couldn't be like a Rhodesia situation, because liberal voters, liberal people, regular voters would never get behind it. It needed to be a group that you could argue reasonably is prosecuted, which Jews fit the mark. Biden literally said if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent one.
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
So take it from him. It's so cynical. Yeah. Holy shit, he literally just said that. I thought the chatter was joking. And nothing I'm saying is conspiratorial. I mean, it's pretty out and open. There was a fundamental inconsistency, okay? In the post-World War II world, all right? There were 2 bodies of power fighting for control over the planet. You had the so-called communists of the Soviet Union, and you had the capitalists of the West. The capitalists of the West, especially in America, had an unprecedented level of control. World War II had opened up the world in a way that it never had been before, and modern technology made international trade more viable than ever before. Western capitalists, especially in America, invested heavily in the rebuilding of Europe and the colonization of the developing world, the revolt against democratic socialists in Latin America and Southeast Asia in favor of Western-backed fascists, and in so doing established a new economic order that they had total control over. Likewise with the establishment of Israel, though early on Israel was backed by both America and the Soviet Union to varying extents for varying reasons. It was a power control thing. It didn't really matter. The Jewish ethno-nationalists had their own interests and would eventually side largely with America. But the fundamental inconsistency is that you had an era of unprecedented economic domination. Like, literally, no one had ever had as much control over the global economy before. The global economy wasn't even a real thing before the post-World War II world. Like, the concept of a global economy only really exists in a world where it is possible to trade globally, and that is a modern phenomena. So At any rate, you have an inconsistency, which is an unprecedented amount of economic control held in the hands of a smaller and smaller group of people who continue to concentrate their power in the hands of smaller and smaller groups over time through the consolidation of capital, the boom-bust cycle leading to the dissolution of resources of the poorer and the assimilation into the hands of the wealthier, and political liberalism. How then do you reconcile political liberalism with its rhetoric of equality, fairness, and so on, with a world where a small group of people control literally everything? Well, one of the best ways to advocate for the interests of the wealthy is to frame it through liberalism, or fighting anti-Semitism. That's it. It's the reason why progressive movements are so often co-opted by the Democratic Party. It's their chosen rhetoric. The best way for them to serve capital is to frame the other side of the argument. It's easy to defend capital interests as a Republican. You're evil and you love evil. Just tell people you're going to do racist shit, and then once you're in power, do the racist shit and also cut taxes. You've got it. But if you're a Democrat, or if you represent the liberal wing of the culture war, you need to find a way to convince people to defend the interests of capital while also nominally supporting the liberal project of progressivism and equality and so on, like fighting bigotry, which is why liberal Zionists are so invested in the rhetoric of fighting bigotry by defending anything and everything Israel does, even though the jig is up and we all know it's fake. They've always been lying. They've always known they're lying. They have never been sincere. It has always been an insincere effort for them to protect their own invested interest in the promulgation of pro-capital policy. You understand, yes? In this respect, it's the reason why it's so important to understand Zionism and Judaism have nothing to do with one another. Zionism was literally created conceptually and backed initially, not just by the Nazis who wanted a way to get Jews out of their country before just deciding on fucking killing them, right? But to a large extent by Goyim, who were interested in, like, evicting Jewish people from Western European states. The roots of Zionism are not like Jewish tradition, not really. It's a recent backing. The Zionism would have always existed, and it could have been for literally any group. Any group. It could have been for any group. It could have been any nationality, any religious group, any ethnicity. The only thing that was necessary was that it be a marginalized group. That's it. So how does this end if this continues? I can't actually see the future, but I appreciate your confidence in my my abilities. Yeah, how informative. What will the world look like in a million years? I think the tectonic plates will move like a little bit by then. A million years? That's enough for Australia to move a little bit more southeast, right? I think. I mean, it's not working anymore. Right, that's the reason why democracy has to end. That's the reason why this is happening all over the West right now. The experiment, which was to trick political liberals into accepting the consolidation of all wealth on earth into the hands of just a few people's pockets, has largely failed. People are now aware from the Occupy Wall Street to Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign run to the Black Lives Matter movement, which was to a large extent at least sympathetic to anti-capitalist arguments, to today. The project has failed. Politically liberal people, by and large, are aware of the fact that all of society is run by a couple of oligarch pedophiles. So they're abandoning the project, and now we just don't get a democracy. If they can't use democracy as an effective theater for producing their desired outcomes, they will simply abandon the theater. Serious question, what system will work? I don't fucking... Not the one they're trying to build. People like Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, they have no idea what they're doing. They're stupid. They can't build a system that works, which is why I think collapse is almost inevitable. They cannot replace democracy. The theater of democracy, the pantomiming of the democratic process, was built by very smart men. You have to understand that, like, the post-World War II Pax Americana hegemon that we built, the one where democracy was used to preserve a theatrical engagement from the citizenry while maintaining the same basic outcomes, this system was built by very smart people. The FBI, CIA, NSA, Department of State, everyone who worked at the federal government, these people by and large were pretty intelligent. Not the presidents themselves, they're largely patsies, but like the people who make sure the system does what it's supposed to. Smart guys. Nowadays, they're not smart. People are stupider now, especially the people on top. So, what they propose as a replacement will not work. I feel like leftists predicting the collapse of American society for like a century now. Okay, at what point in history would you have taken seriously the predictions of a Roman citizen arguing that the Roman Empire was going to collapse? 0? 100 BCE? 200 BCE? If they correctly and accurately predicted the mechanisms that would have led to the collapse of the Roman Empire, how early could they have made it before you would have not taken them seriously? Nothing ever ends until it does. Keep in mind, we're only 30 years out from the end of the Cold War. A little bit more than 30. A little more than 30 years out, and we have gone from the undisputed masters of the world to teetering precariously on the precipice of an energy crisis which threatens to legitimately collapse industrial society in the West. Everyone says it happened slowly, but the historians will talk about this time like it was happening at a breakneck pace. I'm happy because I feel like this was a relatively compact distillation of the reason why Zionism is like that. In a couple of minutes, I was able to touch on the basic principles, the historical precedent, why it is the way it is, both in an immediate and in a broader systematic sense. Normally, it takes me longer to get to it, but I think I was able to distill the argument down to its fundamental essence pretty well here. Genuine question: if you're predicting the end of the world, why don't the protectors of capital want to continue protecting the future of their capital by not doing this whole destroying the world thing? The basic argument is that they're stupid, much in the same way that the old monarchies destroyed their own systems by being too arrogant to capitulate to the working class. Like, every monarchist government at some point or another had a dramatic downfall because they didn't see the writing on the wall. There was a point in time where the monarchies were smart, where kings were lean and fast acting, usually because they grew up through warfare. They had to be smart because if they weren't smart, their lands were conquered. There was a Darwinistic process that ensured their competence. But over time, they grew fat and old and stupid and arrogant, and eventually they were made irrelevant by the passing of time and technological advancement. It happens in all systems when the people in charge get stupid. They get complacent, you know? Yeah, Louis the 14th versus the 16th, 100%. They were also too incapable to reform and share power. All attempts by the court were thwarted by aristocrats and rich landholders. Yeah, they lose control over the system, which has already happened. It's not like the oligarchs effectively control the system. They control it, but they don't really know how to use it. They don't know what they're doing. No one could, by the way. The global economy is too complicated for any set of oligarchs to accurately determine its outcomes. It's not possible. No one can. Monarchies that survived did so by striking deals with the emerging bourgeois class to the detriment of the nobility. Yes, they saw the writing on the wall. There's a reason why the monarchy continues to exist in places like Norway, Spain, to an extent the United Kingdom. It's because they didn't, die on the hill. They were smart enough to understand the best way to continue to preserve the royal family was to capitulate civil power to a democratic system. Denmark as well, yeah. Got to dismantle them? Like the Romanovs. Though, of course, the royal family is hardly a problem in Spain. In fact, the current king is actually relatively progressive, so, the royal families are no longer the real power holders. That's the bourgeoisie.